Welcome to Beyond the Backlog. I'm Nick.
And I'm Zach.
And today we're going to talk about arcades.
So when you walk into an arcade, there's a whole bunch of games lined up, everything from the 70s up until like modern releases. Where do you go? What do you start at?
I go classic. So I like your late 70s, early 80s kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what happened when we went to an arcade a little while back. The very first one that I went to was Centipede.
Yes. You went to Centipede. I went to Missile Command, I think.
I think so.
We started off pretty old, and I kind of wanted to go through some of our highlights from our trip to the arcade and kind of go just over these golden age of arcade games, because I think both of us just have an affinity for some in that era. But then we did check out a few others, but kind of backing it right up, we didn't stop and play like Donkey Kong or Pac-Man, things like that we've already played to death before, I'm sure.
Yeah, the Nintendo/Namco ones that show up pretty well everywhere.
Mm-hmm. So we were hoping to highlight a few games that maybe flew under some radars. Some people wouldn't rush to an arcade to check out. So let's start at the obviously most underappreciated and underrated one, Space Invaders.
Yeah. The oldest one I think that we'll talk about. It's just your classic side-scroll shooter.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty well is what it goes into. But my appreciation for a lot of like the arcade cabinets is just the simplicity of some of it.
Mm-hmm. So Space Invaders was a 1978 release originally. And I think when people say the golden age of arcade games, Space Invaders is kind of the starting point of that.
I believe so.
Mm-hmm.
This is, 45 years afterwards, right? So like my dad might have gone into the arcades to play this when it came out.
Like essentially we had moved past the days of Pong from the 70s, and this was showing like the next evolution in what video games are going to become over the next few years.
Yeah.
And Taito was one of those just kind of champions of that era. I would say Taito, Namco, Nintendo when they got into that business.
Yeah. Atari.
Yeah, I would say like those four alone, you can have a pretty good time with.
Yeah.
And actually, a couple of the ones we want to talk about are the title ones for me specifically. So I wanted to bring up Qwixx. So after Space Invaders, Taito kind of became, as I said, one of those kingpins of arcade games. Qwixx was one that, when it released, everyone loved and talked about, but it was one of those like 15 minutes of fame kind of games.
Yeah, I had never heard of it when we played it.
So I had never actually played it, but on the website Neopets back in the day, one of the mini games that you could play on Flash, I didn't realize it at the time, but is a clone of this game. And actually doing a little bit of research, Qwixx is one of the most cloned games of all time, like right up there with things like Frogger or like Arkanoid. Just this style of game just kind of comes up over and over. And the idea is you're a little spaceship or something. I don't know what your character is supposed to be. And the thing that about Qwixx is there's just like this bar of light that kind of rotates around this box. And your goal is to try and cut into the box and carve out as much of that space of the box as you can. But unless you're touching solid wall, if this moving bar hits you, then you'll lose a life. And to up the ante, there's also these little like missile things that are constantly moving around the border that if they come into contact with you, you'll also lose a life. So it's more of a reactionary and skill-based game.
A little bit of press your luck too.
Mm-hmm. So what I really like about this one is it's not the exact same every time you play stage one.
Yeah, it's one that you have to think more on your feet. It's not like a Space Invaders.
Mm-hmm.
Centipede, Galaga, all that stuff, where it's very, you know what's coming, the stages, you can kind of...
You're kind of guessing where this bar of light is going to be moving and making a run for it before it gets to you. But sometimes it'll bounce off a wall the way you don't expect. And you're like, oh, wait, I have more time. I'm going to try and test my luck a bit and go for a little bit of a bigger space. And the goal on every stage is to try and capture 60% of the playing field, pretty much.
Yeah.
There's bonuses later on because like more than one light bar will appear. There's like bonuses for separating the light bars or for getting them into really, really tiny spaces. Like your bonus multiplier is essentially how much percentage over 60 you got.
So then that adds some strategy to it where you get up. Do you try to go for a big one earlier? Do you get up to like 57, 58% and then try to eke out that extra couple percent, maybe get up to like 70 for some bonus points?
And I think what really does this for me as an arcade game is the fact that you only need to play it until you die a few times pretty much. But there's the little element of like randomness to it. And as I said, it's never the same each time. But I feel like there's a limit to how far humans could push their abilities to survive in this game. And it's not very far into the game.
Yeah.
So it's one where you kind of have 10 minutes of fun and then the game just tries to kill you.
Yes.
And your goal is just survive as long as you can. But I feel like compared to playing something like Pac-Man, it doesn't feel like I am mastering and learning. It feels like, as I said, like I'm thinking on my feet constantly and just adapting. And I love that style of arcade game.
It kind of speaks to the beauty of like the arcades back in the 70s and 80s. And then nowadays, at least where we are, you've got arcade bars, right? So you can go in and you can see them all just kind of set to free play. And then you can just go around and try them all out, which I think bodes really well for that style of game. Because it's not something like, I don't know if I would spend $20, $30 on any of these games.
Oh, it would have been a quarter muncher back in the day.
Yeah, exactly. So it'd be a quarter muncher because you just go and you're like, I almost had it. Let's go again.
Well, and that's where it's like the shift from that golden age into the later 80s and early 90s was more towards these like 40, 50 minute long beat 'em ups, hack and slash kind of games, right?
Yeah.
But was there anything else from that kind of early 80s golden age that stands out to you?
Well, we'll take a quick look then at your Centipede, Galaga types, because you had Space Invaders back in 78, and then a couple years later you get kind of like the supreme version of it, where it's like the graphics are a little bit more there, it's themed a little bit differently. So Centipede, you've got kind of a centipede of bugs just careening down at you, and then when you kill one, it kind of makes a little mushroom thing, and it splits them up, and you have to kind of kill them all before they reach down to where your ship is and kill you. Yeah,
and should be noted, all three, Centipede, Galaga, and Space Invaders, you're a little spaceship at the bottom that is firing up.
Yeah, you don't really get the full joystick capabilities for them. But the Centipede one's kind of cool because it gives that flexibility. Not quite the same as with kicks, but it would be, you have to make sure where you hit them, because all of a sudden you could have 7 ones coming at you, or like a 4 and a 3, and some are easier to deal with than others.
Well, and I genuinely think Centipede is one of my personal least favorite, and it's because I just can't figure out the strategy. I always end up like on the first stage with at least one of them making it down. And as it's getting closer, I'm like, I have like one more shot, and if I miss this, it's over.
Yep. And then you miss where you're, because you only have a certain amount of bullets that show up on screen, and you just miss it. And you're like, well, that's it.
Yeah.
I think of them, it's probably my least favorite as well, but it's one that I always think of, and I'm like, yeah, Centipede is great. My favorite one would probably be Galaga.
Yeah, and I love Galaga because the way it fixes that problem for me specifically is enemies will start coming down towards you, but you dodge, and instead of being like, oh, they hit the bottom of the screen, you essentially lose, they wrap around again.
Yeah, they swing back up at you, so you have to pay more attention to it. It's like an early adopter of like the bullet hell genre, right? Which I really quite enjoy. But then the stages work out well, because each stage, as it progresses, your little ships and bugs and things that attack you get a little bit stronger, and they do a little bit different things. And they react differently, so they kind of keeps you on your toes that way. But they're what I enjoyed when I think of arcade games, which is funny because we grew up late enough that we had some of like your 90s arcade cabinets right near the ends of it.
Yeah, like when I'm thinking of going to the arcade, I'm imagining things like Golden Axe, things like the Simpsons game.
Yep. Gauntlet Legends.
Gauntlet. That was the one. That was the one I was thinking of. Yeah.
Or any of like your racing games, or rather like a Wave Race would be another one.
Or just like those, and any sort of like peripherals and stuff, like steering wheels, light guns.
Yeah, those are the kind of ones that we would have had growing up. So it's kind of interesting to me that I look back and I'm like, no, but these ones are the ones that I know I would have loved. Because it's just that quick little thing, right? It's your little bits of dopamine on it. Try to get the high score, and then it didn't work. Okay, let's put another quarter in.
Yeah,
like that's what would have gotten me.
Absolutely. And one of those benefits of going to the arcade is that there's a good number of multiplayer games as well. And a lot of these home ports didn't involve multiplayer. Like you can't play Pac-Man multiplayer on the NES. Whereas in the arcades, like sure, you were taking turns, and it's like every time you lost a life, somebody stepped up. But there are a few good multiplayer ones that we did get around to playing. I do love me some NBA Jam, even if I prefer it on like home console.
Yep.
Like I love playing Blades of Steel, even if I prefer it on home console. But Bobble Bobble is the one that really sticks out to me, and that's the next one I wanted to mention. And again, we're looking at Taito, but so for some reason, Taito just makes the games I like.
Yeah.
But this one is a little later on. It was from 1986 and was released like directly to NES at the same time, I believe.
I believe so. And we're looking like time frame wise, like 5 years after all the ones that we had just talked about.
But what I really like about this one as a multiplayer arcade experience is all you need is a joystick that goes left and right and a shoot button. And that's literally it. So it's the same control scheme, I guess you could say, as Galaga, as Centipede, as Space Invaders. It's as simple to understand, but you actually get to move around the levels. Like you pretty much just shoot enemies into bubbles, try and get up a big chain of bubbles so that when you run and jump into it, it'll pop them all and give you a whole bunch of points. And for some reason, that particular game, I don't know if for me it's just nostalgia at this point, but I will happily put that on and play it until I fully run out of lives, which at this point is most of the game. I think there's 50 stages.
I think so, yeah.
And even when we went to the arcade and played it, I got to stage like 40. He did not. He died.
No, I got a little bit stricken with the ADD there, where I was like, all right, let's see what else I have to do.
But I was genuinely having so much fun just playing Bubble Bobble that I kept going.
Oh, it was great. It was a lot of fun to play it. And I think it hits the type of thing where a lot of the older games don't, where they just don't hold up quite so well. Because with Bubble Bobble, it's still kind of fun, and it had just that, it's just a touch easier, I think is what it is.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. It's the kind of game where the strategy is in how well you can bunch enemies up to get a high score.
Rather than survival.
But if you want to make surviving as long as possible your goal, you can do that instead. And I love games that kind of give you that option to play the way you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was there anything that you wanted to mention in terms of those multiplayer offerings?
Maybe not as much with multiplayer offerings, but it is interesting to note that because we aren't really fighting game guys, or I don't know, speak to you, but I'm not a big beat 'em up guy either. We kind of completely shirk all of those style of games.
Fair. Like, again, when I mentioned like the Simpsons game, or even like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like I like playing those games. I couldn't do like one after the other full game sessions. It's more of I want to play one for 30 minutes and then I'm good.
Yeah, let's go to the next ones. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's, for me, I would have hated it once it got to like 1990, 1991, when it's all like your Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat-esque things with your TMNT, your Simpsons. And I'm just like, well, I just wanted to play Galaga, man.
But like blood violence was like the cool thing at that time.
I guess. it's just not being a 2D fighter guy.
Yeah. Fair enough. And I also don't particularly care much for them. And it's just because I'm not good at them.
Yeah, I think that's most of what it is too.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm the worst one at the 2D fighters out of my family.
And the fact that we're going from even like games in the 90s using a D-pad for fighting, I would rather that D-pad than an arcade joystick.
Yes, especially one that doesn't have divots for directions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right, because otherwise you're just, who knows?
I could give you a Hadouken, that's about it.
Yeah, I don't even know if I could do that. But then we go into kind of when we would have been growing up for it, like your late 90s with the peripherals.
Yeah.
And that's where you kind of start running into, I would say, a bit more of the decline of arcades. Like home consoles, it's always going to happen, but it felt like they were trying to use peripherals as a way to kind of do a little bit extra with it. And it's like, yeah, but you can't have, the steering wheel. You can't have the big dance pad at your home.
Yeah. And that's what I think is, it was a way to make the arcade flashy when you walk in. You're like, wow, I can pick up this gun and just like start shooting dinosaurs. Like that sounds really, really cool. Man, I can pick up this like plastic guitar and like start like playing notes. Yeah, but you can't calibrate it like you would on your home TV. You can't put the volume up to an actual audible level where you can hear the intricacies of like the notes you're trying to play.
Yeah.
And it's like this sticky, many hands have been on it, kind of like buttons. So something about that just doesn't quite catch my interest. Again, like really flashy, draws you in, but once you've had your fun with it, I don't want to go back, except for a few. And I actually really like the like racing games and arcades where you sit down on like a big seat. I've seen ones where it's like snowboarding and you're actually like turning a physical snowboard, leaning back and forth. Or
they didn't have it there, but like the jet ski for wave race, right? Just leaning forward, or like the old snowmobile one,
or like the big motorcycles.
Yep.
Like those are just fun. Even if it's hard to control the actual game, like that just feels very good. The one that is nice to control is the cruising games.
Yeah.
So I do like playing these on home console. But when you play on a home console, it's like, all right, I played each of the 10 tracks once. And even if I didn't win the track, it's like I kind of saw everything it was.
Yep, I saw everything. I would spend $10 nowadays for it.
Mm-hmm. But I think those games are designed to be like the big plastic seat covers, fake like transmission over here, horn over here. Like it's meant to be
music,
that experience where you're kind of in the car. Just something about that really brings me into it and just makes me want to keep playing it. So Cruisin' Exotica was the one that was at the arcade near us, and we only sat down to maybe play one or two. I think we did like 3 or 4 though.
Yeah, I think we did 4 and we were like, okay, we should go.
Yeah, we did 4 and we're just like, we're probably hogging this because there's like 80 people in this building right now and we're the only ones that have been using it for 15 minutes. So
yeah. And the counterpoint to it is beside it was a Mario Kart one. Mm-hmm. And I felt that one didn't hit quite so well as the Cruisin' one did.
Mm-hmm. And I think for me, the feel of the wheel is just stiffer. The feel of the pedals is a lot stiffer. And
they tried to do it like random. So you only got a certain amount of items that you had access to as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like, okay, well, it just felt a little bit more luck based. Whereas the cool thing with Cruisin' was you're just kind of driving around.
Yeah.
Right? It's all on you. It has that like crazy taxi-esque, style to it.
And I think the big boon for the cruising games is that they're arcade games that made it home, whereas Mario Kart for 8 generations at that point had been home only. And when they brought it to arcades, they had to make some concessions to just make it accessible, because even when the very first one came out was after Wii, and it's not like you're going to put Mario Kart Wii's Rainbow Road on an arcade game that like 5-year-olds are going to be steering wheeling with.
Yeah.
So they made some concessions. Even the hard, quote unquote, tracks as they're listed are pretty standard Mario Kart fare.
Yeah. Yeah, they were just... It was cool to play some of the stages that you don't get to see on console, but by and large, if you gave me a choice between those two, I would pick Cruisin'.
And now, were there any that you just straight up did not like?
Just like the rail shooters.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was. I just didn't enjoy the rail shooters.
Did you actually try one while we were there?
Yeah.
Okay.
When you were doing...
I was playing DDR.
Yeah, it was DDR. You were doing DDR and the Bubble Bobble. When I left, I went to play some rail shooters and it was just fine.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're kind of cool, and I used to quite like them. But it's just trying to go back to them. It'd be like trying to play Duck Hunt now, which is just kind of like, it's kind of cool, but it doesn't have that lasting appeal.
I don't know, maybe it's just the years of controlling video games with controllers, but something about the triggers on those just doesn't have the same like tactile feel as like pressing an R2 button on like a PlayStation controller does.
It's the same thing like driving a steering wheel versus a controller is always just that little bit different.
Mm-hmm. And it's, I feel like with this and the one I'm going to complain about, a lot of it comes down to just that sense of calibration too.
Yes.
Like, when I go to a movie theater and I see there's like some dinosaur shooting game over here, I don't want to go sit down and play it, because every time I'm like, I literally feel like I'm putting it right up to a screen. I'm like, that's its face. And it's just like, nope, you're shooting way off here.
Yeah.
Yeah. You need to spend a lot more time than you can afford at an arcade to just kind of get used to it and like learn where enemies are before you can really dig into the game. And I guess I just don't care enough to dig into one of those games and actually see how long it is and where you go and the cool set pieces of it.
It's the uniqueness of enjoying arcade games, growing up in like the tail end of it, but not having that nostalgia, right? Just makes it so that some of them just really don't hit, when I'm sure back in the day they would have been huge players.
Mm-hmm. And the one that I really just don't like doing in arcades are, as I alluded to earlier, like music rhythm games that have these big, bulky plastic peripherals.
Yeah.
Like, I love Guitar Hero. We did a whole episode on Guitar and Rock Band, where we just gushed about how much these games are important to us and our lives. But I would never pick it up in an arcade.
No.
And the one that
You tried.
Yeah, I tried one. I was literally just like, that sucked.
Yeah.
But it's also, again, so many years of, I'm used to calibrating it on my TV, having these audio settings and my instruments that I take really good care of, versus this weird Japanese import thing at the arcade we went to that just is stiff and rigid and doesn't have like a very tactile feel to the strumming bar, feels wrong. Or Dance Dance Revolution, which I love that series, but something about just the presentation at these arcade cabinets, it's almost like you're too close to the screen, and it's like centered between the two sets. Mm-hmm. So it's like you're almost head tilted to the side to actually watch what's happening. And I feel like I always just get my feet way off of where they're supposed to be. And it's like, how do you make this pad perfect for all shapes and sizes and abilities of people? And I genuinely just can't get beyond easy on those, because I just can't stay on track and stay on top of where I'm supposed to be. And it gets really, it just frustrates me more than anything. And the music in these, as I said, like you tend to get the cheaper, like Japanese imported older ones where it's like, nobody knows any of the songs on this. Whereas at home, I have played like the Mario Mega Mix on GameCube, or even just like, there was one on Wii where it was a whole bunch of like contemporary rock songs and stuff on it. And like, those were just fun to play.
Yeah.
And I had enough time to learn how the mat like felt under my feet and get used to it. And like, it takes a few hours before you can rock out on higher difficulties. Whereas just playing at the arcade, I try it once. I'm like, this is frustrating. And then somebody else is lined up to use it. So I never get that chance to like learn how to play it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it's like you said, it's the calibration. It's not getting used to everything.
Yeah. You just don't have enough time to sit and focus. And at an arcade, what you need is something you just pick up and play.
Yeah. Which is why I think that's ultimately why we go more for the older ones. Because I think that was everyone is new to this thing at this point, right? So we need entry level. We don't know what hard is at that point, right?
And there is definitely something to be said about even games that I can happily play on home console. Just, I don't enjoy them as much with a joystick and these big bulky buttons that you swear you should be attacking right now, but it's just taking forever to actually register. Just something about that doesn't hit me the right way.
Yeah, exactly.
But to end on a positive note, go check out your local arcades, go support them, try out some of the games we mentioned, and heck, try out ones you've never even heard of before. You never know when you're going to find a diamond in the rough there. And
some of them, if you do like them, most of the time they are available like browser wide or on any type of game.
I was going to say, if you've ever played any sort of like game of Breakout, or on BlackBerry, it was Ball Breaker, Arkanoid is like, they all come from arcade games that just get iterated upon over decades and decades. So
new setting, new style. It's like a Tetris kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Like when I was describing Quicks, if that sounded cool to you, there's probably a much more recent, better done version of it somewhere out there. And if you know what that is, let me know, because I freaking love that game.
Sure, you'd be the first person 40 years to know what it would be. But that's it. That's all. Everybody take care. Have a good day, good night, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening.